Episode 9. Friends are family too. Because we are brothers. It took the whole next morning to bring some semblance of normalcy back to Martin's farm. Everyone helped clean up. A stack of wooden slats had fallen over. Roger had examined the roof, and the fence around the hen houses had to be rebuilt. Even the wire donkey that decorated the yard had fallen over. And in the middle of it all, the chickens were clucking, looking for a dry roost in the wet ground while inspecting their newly built house. Mrs. Martin, who hung up the barn door with Roger, remarked with a sigh, "Maybe I'll have to think about the lease contract for the paddock again." "Kim said that you can call her any time," Roger replied. Tina perked up. "What? No way! The pasture is for the horses," Bibi also objected. Yeah, talking is easy, Bibi. Shall I show you both what happens if we don't?" he replied, heading into His Highness's stall. Bibi and Tina exchanged a frustrated look, especially when Tina's brother came out of the stable with the billy goat the next moment, pointing at him and saying, "Sell!" Tina laid into her brother. "Are you crazy?" Mrs. Martin also found this a bit too far. Roger shook his head. "No way, and maybe not only Highness. We don't have food for any of the animals anymore." All of a sudden, Tina realized something and asked him directly, "Does this have anything to do with the fact that you find this Kim cool? Or why do you wear that scarf all the time?" Bibi frowned. This was true. Roger had been walking around with that scarf for days. Had Kim given it to him? "What does that have to do with Kim?" Roger replied defensively. Tina became more snappy. Yes, this Kim, eh?" Roger also became more peppery. "You can stay out of this, Tina. The one has nothing to do with the other." But his sister seemed to see it quite differently. Roger looked at her angrily. "I'm the one looking after the farm the whole time." Tina cut him off. She also helped her mother during the summer vacations, and Bibi also helped. "Quiet now," Mrs. Martin interjected. That was the last thing her children needed, to get into an argument. "I am still the one who decides, and until then, we still have a lot of work to do around here." Count Falco, Alex, and Chico came riding onto the farm, all three in the best of moods. The boys trotted in a circle around Bibi and Tina and sang a song of friendship. It was nice to see their two friends so delighted. It came as a welcome distraction from their current predicament. Even Roger's face brightened up. Count Falco announced, "We just wanted to let you know that this afternoon, at 4 p.m. in the Falkenstein Inn, I will publicly announce how lucky I consider myself now that Chico belongs to the family. Food and drink will be provided." Alex and Chico gave each other high fives and shouted, "Brothers!" Mrs. Martin smiled amusedly. "Falco, I don't even recognize you like this," the Count replied exuberantly. "Life is just full of surprises. One must accept that, Suzanne. Today, nothing is too expensive for me. Everything is free of charge." He quickly added, "Well, free until 5 p.m. "Is your mother coming too?" Bibi asked Chico. The young Spaniard shook his head. "Too bad. I couldn't reach her yesterday. And now, to come here from Spain? I would have loved to have her here." "We'll do that later," cried Count Falco. "But now onwards, my sons. We want to show Chico our lands. As the firstborn, he's right at the top of the line of succession, and we'll have to take care of everything later." Tina listened perplexed. "Pardon?" Alex nodded happily. "Of course. Less possession, less responsibility." "Are you crazy?" Tina said. But Alex just shrugged with a grin. "See you later." Chico obliged him with a look at Bibi. "See you. Vamos." "Sí, vamos." Count Falco also gave the signal for departure. He now had a Spaniard in his family, and naturally he wanted to convey respect. As the three of them were riding off, Tina watched them go with her mouth agape. Bibi pushed her friend. "Well, Tina, I guess this won't work out with life at the castle after all." Tina shrugged her shoulders and played it cool. "I don't want to live in that old box anyway." When Bibi looked at her skeptically, she added, "I was just surprised, really now, and Alex seems to be quite happy." "Speaking of happy," Bibi replied, "do you think there's another way to get Chico's mother to be here on time after all? I mean, who knows? Maybe Count Falco would be happy too." Tina grinned. "You'd have to be a witch. Wouldn't you? Bibi grinned. Only as an exception. Elena Montoya. Bibi and Tina crept carefully into Chico's room and looked around. Bibi needed something from Chico's mother to witch herself to her, but the boys' room was a mess, and the two girls didn't feel particularly comfortable digging around in Chico's private things. Tina sniffed at a stinky sock. Ugh, typical boys. What a pigsty, Bibi thought. Something in Chico's backpack caught Tina's attention. A bound book, which also contained loose papers and a letter. Tina opened it carefully and pulled out a slightly yellowed photo of a young woman and a man who looked very much in love. Is that? Tina asked hesitantly. Chico's mother and Count Falco? Bibi completed her sentence. There he looks like Alex. Nonsense, replied Tina. 100%, Bibi replied. They are quite similar, those two. Now stop it, replied Tina. But Bibi said, the older you get, the more you resemble your father. Tina shouted, Ugh, you're scaring me. Bibi noticed that this idea really did seem to frighten Tina, so she attempted to straighten it out quickly. Well, it's not a given, but it's possible. Tina sighed. Ah, great. Bibi lifted her arms. Here goes, she said to her friend, then sang out. Eeny meeny found a brother. Take me straight to Chico's mother. Whiz whiz. Tina was suddenly alone in Chico's room, while Bibi found herself in the vastness of Spain. A beautiful black horse came galloping towards her, but the rider parried right where she stood and brought the obedient horse to a halt. Astonished, the woman asked Bibi something in Spanish, which Bibi unfortunately did not understand. She was probably wondering where Bibi had come from so quickly. Bibi recognized Chico's mother immediately. I come in peace. Paz? I am Bibi Blocksberg. This seemed to confuse Elena even more. Then she asked, What's going on here? Bibi smiled in relief. You speak English? Chico has tried to reach you. He's in Falkenstein. Elena's eyes widened at the sound of her son's name. Chico? He is, please, where? Well, with his father, replied Bibi. Elena stared at Bibi, now completely dumbfounded, and shook her head. No. This is not possible. Didn't he tell you that? Bibi asked. I can take you to him. Will you trust me? She then extended her hand to Elena, who, after a short hesitation, reached down and took it. Meanwhile, Tina had resumed the cleanup work on the farm when suddenly Bibi and Elena appeared in the square. She heaved a sigh of relief. Bibi looked around briefly and then pointed to Tina. Well, this is Martin's farm, and this is Tina, my very best friend. Elena nodded politely before hastily and nervously adding, And where is Chico? Probably at the inn, Tina replied. At 4 p.m., the Count wants to announce that Chico is his son. Elena was flummoxed. Who? Count Falco von Falkenstein, said Tina. Chico's father, Bibi added, explaining. Elena waved frantically. No, I must go to him immediately. Where are the horses? Confused, Bibi and Tina pointed to the stable. Elena nodded. Okay, come quickly. She was already running ahead towards the stable. Bibi and Tina followed her. Mrs. Martin and Roger, who had just loaded the last wooden slats onto a trailer, tuned in to the commotion. Roger shouted, Hey, we're not done cleaning up yet. Who is this woman? His mother asked impatiently. Roger shook his head. That's typical again. He did all the work, and he had no idea who this woman was either. Something's rotten here. Funky Farnsworth wondered where on earth her intern, Alexander von Falkenstein, had disappeared to. Taking Alex's place, she read aloud a message she had just received in the studio of Radio Flamingo. It's 3:45 and you are listening to Radio Flamingo. We're ad-free, unbiased, and impeccable. This is Funky Farnsworth, and I have just received news that an event is taking place in the Falkenstein Inn. Food and drink is provided until 5 o'clock. Everyone is welcome. Initiated and sponsored by Count Falco von Falkenstein. Then she cut out, quickly set on some music, and turned to her radio technician, Paul. Wait a minute. Is that why Alexander is missing? Unexcused? And what was the reason for this generous invitation? Paul, who was just about to bite into his breakfast roll, shrugged his shoulders. Funky hurriedly grabbed her coat. "Of course I'm going to go. Paul, you take over." Paul flinched and forced down his one and only bite of sandwich. Always the stress. The first guests had already arrived in front of the inn. Among them were the mill farmer and his friends, Mrs. Sauer and Mr. Quigley, who, strangely enough, had all decorated themselves with the same scarf as Roger. The mill farmer wore it in his breast pocket. Mrs. Sauer swung it loosely around her hips, and Mr. Quigley wore it as a smart scarf. But in her haste, Funky didn't even notice. She quickly pulled out her microphone, held it under the mill farmer's nose, and asked, "Why do you think Count Falco von Falkenstein has invited you to the Falkenstein Inn today?" The mill farmer, who liked to make himself important, answered uncaringly, "Well, the Count will make you jump through fire if his house is burning." Mrs. Sauer lived up to her name and commented pointedly, "He's usually so stingy. This must be something rotten. He only wants to increase the rent." But the mill farmer made yet another assumption. "I could imagine that the whole thing is a completely different reason. I'll only say gray gold." Funky eyed him with uncertainty. Mr. Quigley seemed to suspect what the mill farmer was implying. "Because of the gravel pit." "Gravel pit?" Funky asked. Mr. Quigley nodded and couldn't resist mentioning. "And in the end, the Count will make the biggest profit again. Typical nobility." Before Funky could ask, Freddie pushed past them. "So, now make way there. Why not interview the really important people? Me, for example." He was as cheeky as always, and in a good mood. Funky only rolled her eyes, which Freddie had missed anyhow as he herded into the inn together with the other guests. He got no further. To the rear of the lounge was a small platform on which Count Falco could be seen better during his speech. Supported by Ethelbert, he stood beside it and rehearsed once more. "Dear men and women of Falkenstein," Ethelbert remarked. Or vice versa, women really have come second long enough. Count Falco nodded. "Yes, right, of course. In any case, or more generally," he started again. "Dear guests, I am pleased to introduce you to my son, Chico Montoya, or formerly Montoya. Now, von Falkenstein, who has unexpectedly come into my life, but is most welcome to be able to be allowed... Nope, to want." Finally, he had found the right word, because he really was proud of his son, who had come along so late in life. Alex and Chico stood in a room next door and looked at each other in the mirror. Chico, like Alex, wore a jacket with the family crest of the von Falkenstein family, and all of a sudden they really looked like brothers. Chico smiled confidently. He too was mighty proud, feeling it a great honor to represent the family and be allowed to wear the coat of arms. Touched, he thanked Alex profusely, who then put his arm around Chico's shoulder. To family! It just felt too good to have a brother. Chico had an idea. "I'll just finish school here. I only have 2 years left until I graduate from high school anyway." Cool idea, Alex thought. "But what about your mother?" Chico beckoned. "Oh, she'll understand. A young man needs his father." Alex pulled a face. "Yeah, sometimes." Bibi, Tina, and Elena now rode in front of the inn. Visibly tense, Elena got off her horse and stormed towards the Falkenstein entrance. The girls hurried to keep up with her. Chico's mother had not said a word during the whole way over. What was she thinking about? Why did she seem so distressed? "Elena, what is actually going on?" Bibi asked. Nervously, Elena finally replied, "Chico is not my son." Bibi and Tina looked at her confusedly, and Elena now also realized what she had just said and corrected herself. "Nonsense! Of course Chico is my son. What I wanted to say is, Chico is not Count Falco's son." "What?" Bibi and Tina were completely dumbfounded. Then he's not Alex's brother either?" Tina asked. She looked at Bibi and said, "Drama." Bibi nodded. "And if we don't hurry, it'll be a huge drama in which all of Falkenstein will take part. Come on!" They hurried into the dining room, where more and more guests crowded in. Freddie was already standing at the buffet grabbing a snack. Satisfied, he remarked, "Hey, you don't look a gift horse in the mouth." but the innkeeper blocked the table and rebuked him harshly. "Hands off! It's not open yet!" Freddy looked at him in disgust. "Give me a break, dude!" But under his strict gaze, he put the morsel back again. Funky Farnsworth ran past them while she rambled enthusiastically into her microphone. "Count Falco has such a lovely aura. Today, I might have the unique chance for a solo interview." Bibi, Tina, and Elena pushed their way through the crowd. They passed the mill farmer, Mrs. Sauer, and Mr. Quigley. Tina stopped short and remarked to Bibi, "They're all wearing the same scarf as Roger." Bibi thought nothing of it. "Discount aisle?" Then the mill farmer discovered her and called out, "Bibi Blocksberg, you want a piece of the cake too, huh?" "There won't be any more cake today," she answered grimly, thinking about Alex and Chico, who were about to experience something awful, and hopefully, at least before the Count made his speech. At that moment, Ethelbert played a flourish on the piano to announce Count Falco's entrance. She needed to hurry. Bibi continued to push. The mill farmer shouted after her, "Hey, what's the idea with that?" "Let yourself be surprised," answered Bibi, and caught up with Tina and Elena, who were standing near the platform on which Count Falco had already positioned himself. He grabbed the microphone, which crackled and whistled briefly due to feedback, and, to Bibi's horror, dove right into his speech. "Dear guests, a wonderful event brings us together here today. I am pleased—" "When will the buffet be opened?" Freddy shouted from the back of the room. Count Falco looked at him disapprovingly. "Soon, Freddy, soon." Then he began again with his speech. "I am pleased." He cleared his throat before continuing. "You came unexpectedly into my life." Chico waited with Alex in the background for Count Falco to call them to the platform as agreed. But suddenly, his eyes widened, and his heart fluttered when his gaze settled on a woman in the hall next to Bibi and Tina who looked familiar to him. Was that not— "Mama!" slipped out in surprise. Before Alex's father could say anything about Chico, Bibi hurriedly raised her arms toward the Count and said, "Eeny meeny, words unsung, fumbled speech and twisted tongue, whiz whiz." A jolt went through the astonished Count Falco and he stammered, fighting to finish the next word of his speech. And Bibi's spell acted like an emergency stop. No matter how Count Falco opened his mouth and tried, nothing but the pressed, long drawn-out sound, "ah," came over his lips. "What has entered your life now?" cried Freddy. Count Falco started again and repeated, "You have unexpectedly stepped into my life. And again he could not get any further. The spell slowed him down right on the eh. Freddy sighed. "And when will the buffet finally open?" The guests began to grumble. Funky Farnsworth spoke into her microphone. "He has so much to say, only when will he finally do it?" Count Falco forced a tortured smile and tried it once more. "You who unexpectedly stepped into my life, And then again, not a word. Worried, Alex asked him if everything was okay. But instead of an answer, only the same sentence came over Falco's lips again. "You who unexpectedly entered into my life, Desperate, Count Falco turned to Ethelbert, who tried to calm him down. "It's probably just nervousness. Take a sip of water and breathe deeply." The Count gratefully accepted the filled glass and took a big gulp. Bibi turned to Chico's mother. "Elena, you must tell him the truth now." She seemed to be more than right. The Count came on stage again to finally reveal what was so important to him. "You have unexpectedly stepped into my life, But this time he desperately gave up and ran from the stage. Through a corridor, which was actually reserved for the staff, he came to the kitchen, locked the door behind him, and faced the startled chef. Prudently, Ethelbert grabbed the microphone and tried to save the situation with a diversionary tactic. "The buffet is now open." It worked. Immediately, the guests rushed to the buffet, as nobody wanted to miss the delicacies. Meanwhile, Alex and Ethelbert followed Count Falco towards the kitchen, as did Bibi and Tina. Elena, on the other hand, fought her way to her son, who asked her in surprise, "What are you doing here?" "I'm sorry," Elena embraced her son. "Sorry?" Chico asked in surprise. "Mom, you have nothing to be sorry for. I am the happiest person in the world. I have finally found my father." The real truth. Ethelbert, Alex, Bibi, and Tina stood in front of the locked kitchen door. They could see the outline of Count Falco through the frosted window, but he was not ready to open it. Ethelbert knocked first. "Sir, you cannot always run away from everything and lock yourself in." Alex listened at the door and admonished him. "Father, really, you're acting like a little child. You came into my life unexpectedly." The words, uttered miserably, penetrated through the keyhole. "Are a few synapses burnt out from all the excitement?" Alex asked Ethelbert. Bibi cleared her throat. "Sorry, it was I." Tina nodded. Bibi jinxed that Count Falco couldn't speak any further. "Yes, and for a good reason," added Elena, who was now also standing in front of the locked door. "What is all this?" asked Chico. They could see Count Falco pressing his ear against the window pane, because he was clearly wondering the same thing. Elena looked firmly at her son. Then she took a deep breath and finally confessed. "Count Falco is not your father." "Que mama?" Chico looked at her, horrified. Alex, too, thought that he didn't hear properly. "He cannot be your father. I would know that," Elena affirmed. Count Falco, deeply shaken, murmured from behind the door. "To you, my unexpected, into my life?" Elena took a step towards the door and called, "Falquito, can you hear me?" Count Falco took a deep breath in and out. Had he just heard right? Elena took another step closer and explained. "When you left Spain, I was very lonely, and I got to know Chico's father, a musician, shortly after. We had one night. He looked very good, but he was a mediocre musician and even less of a man, and that's why he disappeared." She turned to her son. "But Chico, you are here, and you are the best thing that could have ever happened to me." With that, she gave him a kiss on the cheek. Then slowly the door to the kitchen opened and Count Falco stepped out. With a hardened face, he tried to speak. "Unexpectedly into my life?" But the spell was still not broken. The Count quickly withdrew into the kitchen again. Led by Elena, all the others followed. The chef was clueless about the sudden party. He had never experienced his kitchen so full. Only Chico didn't follow after this roller coaster of emotions and watched the action from the hallway. Bibi quickly raised her arms and released the Count. "Eeny meeny, speech technique. Allow the Count to freely speak. Whiz, whiz." "Did I hear you right?" Count Falco asked. Bibi sighed in relief. At last the Count was able to talk sense again. Elena nodded. "Si." Alex understood what this meant. "I don't have a brother. I'm alone again." Tina took his hand. "Hey, you're not alone." Bibi nodded and went to Alex as well. She embraced him and said comfortingly, "Friends are family too." Ethelbert was the first to sense that Chico had left in the meantime. Bibi and Tina also soon noticed that Chico was no longer there. Panicked, they looked around and shouted, "Chico!" Then they ran out of the kitchen together with Alex to track down their friend. Elena also wanted to follow them, but Count Falco stood in her way. "Elena, wait! I don't understand. At that time, that night on the beach, the moon, the wine, how could it be that nothing happened?" A gentle smile came over Elena's face. "Falquito, you're still a hopeless romantic. But now is no time for that. Come on, Falquito." She took his hand and pulled him with her. Ethelbert smiled. He had always known that Count Falco had a completely different side to him, which he always tried to hide. So much the better that it came to light. Ethelbert turned to the chef reassuringly. "Feel free to keep cooking." Then he walked out of the kitchen to join the others. Where is Chico? Bibi, Tina, and Alex stormed into the hall where the jovial guests were plundering the buffet and chatting away. Bibi turned to Freddie, who was blissfully shoving an oversized piece of cake into his mouth. "Have you seen Chico?"
He just bolted outside so dramatically," Freddie replied with a full mouth. "And I even tried to offer him something else."
The three friends ran outside, but it was too late. Chico had already grabbed Tricky and galloped off. Bibi yelled excitedly, "Where did he go?" A little girl, leaning against the fountain and licking an ice cream, raised her arm and pointed up the street. "Towards the castle," Alex asserted, and ran to the horses. His chest tightening as a sense of fear overwhelmed him. Things were bad enough as they were. But to think now of how Chico must feel. The young Spaniard trotted solemnly across the fields on Tricky. That very moment, as he stood alone in front of the kitchen door and felt forgotten by everyone else, was the moment his dream was shattered. Your friends are family. The three friends galloped at full speed to the castle. Go, Sabrina! Bibi cheered her horse on. She was as worried about Chico as Alex was. Faster, Amadeus! Cried Tina. The horses seemed to sense the seriousness of the situation and tucked their heads forward, pushing on as fast as they could along the lakeside path to the castle. When Bibi saw the turret spires, which rose deceptively into the sky before them, she spotted Tricky grazing in the meadow. But the saddle was empty. Where was Chico? Startled, the three friends jumped from their horses and began searching. Alex discovered something behind a small boat on the lakeside. Chico's jacket, with the von Falkenstein family coat of arms, lying in the water. Frantically, Alex ran into the jetty and fished the jacket out. He went like Ludwig, cried Alex, referring to the famous Bavarian king who had drowned. Bibi shook her head resolutely. No, he wouldn't do that. It's not possible. Alex, cried Tina in horror when she watched Alex scramble, taking off his riding helmet, jacket, and glasses before jumping into the lake. He disappeared for too long before coming up again and shouting, No, he's not here. Tina exhaled a sigh of relief and turned to Bibi, but she was gone. Bibi was sure that Chico was not at the lake. She felt his closeness and followed her intuition. Indeed, she found him hunched on the stairs to the castle terrace, where he had felt at home not long ago. He was infinitely sad and alone. He had lost his new home, and his dream of becoming part of the von Falkenstein family was over forever. Chico's eyes filled with tears. Bibi wanted to comfort him and approached carefully, step by step, softly taking a seat beside the young, heartbroken Spaniard. She understood very well what a shock it must have been for him in the kitchen at Falkenstein Inn. At the same time, she felt responsible for the whole situation. Without her witchcraft, his mother, Elena, would not have even been there. Nevertheless, Bibi was relieved that Elena had told Chico the truth about his father. Even if Chico was not Count Falco's son, he remained her friend, and friends are also family. He could always rely on that. They would always stand by him and be there for him, but he was not allowed to give up on himself. That was the most important thing. Chico could feel Bibi's honesty and empathy. He would always carry his new friends like a family in his heart, and he was immeasurably grateful that he had met them all in the first place, even if he had come to Falkenstein in search of something completely different. Bibi and Chico embraced each other. Suddenly they noticed Alex and Tina, soaking wet, walking up from the lake, followed by Elena and Count Falco on horseback. "Brother in spirit!" cried Alex. He moved towards the stairs and handed Chico the jacket bearing the family coat of arms. Chico would belong forever. "No sé qué decir," Chico replied, touched. I don't even know what to say." As he searched for words, Count Falco interjected. No, you do not have to say anything, for I know you are a young man of honor. You could even have that from me, somehow." Alex rolled his eyes. Tina nudged him, because, actually, it was quite a touching thing for his father to say. "And of course, you are always welcome in Falkenstein," the Count continued. "Mi castillo es tu castillo." Elena looked at Count Falco with gratitude. "Que bien. We would like to come once to visit." Chico felt his spirit rise with immense gratitude. Bibi was thrilled, and when she smiled at him, her heart took a small leap. Do something, Bibi. In the end, everything had worked out wonderfully. At least, that's what Bibi and Tina thought as they rode together back to Martin's farm after this exciting day. Chico wanted to stay at the castle together with his mother. There was still so much to tell, and the two girls understood that the family needed time together. Though she said nothing to Tina, Bibi already missed Chico. The two girls abruptly silenced their good-natured chat as they rode past the stable to the farm. There, at the outside table, sat Mrs. Martin and Roger together with none other than Mrs. Kim Win-Win. Baffled, Tina shouted across the yard, "What's going on here?" Her mother was holding a pen and was about to sign a document on the table in front of her. Startled, Tina turned to her friend. They're signing the contract! Bibi, do something! Your magic never lasts. Bibi quickly raised her arms and blurted out, Eeny meeny, pen between fingers, is now a swarm of bees with stingers. Whiz whiz. Mrs. Martin threw an uncomfortable glance at the pen with which she was about to sign the contract, as she suddenly found herself gripping a purple carrot. Of course, she immediately knew who was responsible for this and openly chided the young witch. Bibi? Bibi shrugged her shoulders. Sorry, but... Tina interrupted and turned angrily toward her mother. You really want to sell the paddock? Annoyed, Roger also interfered. Yes, and then we'll finally have money for feed again. Kim Win-Win handed Mrs. Martin a new pen and offered a pleading, slightly impatient look. You will certainly not regret it. Tina took her brother to task. Why don't you think about us, about the farm? It's about a paddock, Tina, Roger retorted. Tina shouted. It's about everything, Roger. This is my home, too. Roger burst out angrily. Okay, we have a real problem here, Tina. He pointed at Kim. Kim doesn't only think about herself, she also thinks ahead, just like I do. And if you can't see that, he stared straight at Bibi, then you can do all the work around here. We will, Tina replied defiantly. Oh, honestly, Roger barked. Who will take care of everything? The horses? The finances? The food? While you go galloping about having all the fun, you're always out having fun. Tina took a deep breath. Look, Roger interrupted her again angrily. Tina, did it ever cross your mind that maybe I would like to do something completely different? Tina hadn't expected this. Unmoved by the siblings' quarrel, Kim Win-Win had her eyes locked on Bibi. A triumphant smile widened across her face. Even this little brat's magic couldn't stop her business plan, no matter what she came up with. Bibi's mind raced feverishly for a good idea. Finally, Mrs. Martin put her foot down and silenced her two bickering children. Roger is right. She reached for the new pen that Kim Win-Win had given her. Tina shouted, Mom, no! Bibi raised her arms. Eeny meeny, quick convert, gravel into useless dirt, whiz whiz. Really now, Bibi, you cannot be serious, cried Mrs. Martin. What was the matter with these girls? She grabbed one of the small glasses with Kim's samples that lay on the table in front of her. Instead of fine gravel, there was now dark brown earth in it. There must be another solution. Everything is already so messed up here anyways, Bibi defended herself. Without missing a beat, Kim simply announced, Not to worry, Mrs. Martin. She turned to Bibi with that familiar, knowing smile playing around the corners of her mouth. Your magic will never last. Soon there will be gravel again. You cannot stop the things that really matter, you know. As a confirmation, Mrs. Martin signed the contract. Tina sighed desperately as Bibi looked at her sympathetically. What else could they possibly do? Billy the Kid came to the table and snapped at the carrot, but Roger quickly pulled it back. Better not, Billy. Otherwise, you'll have a ballpoint pen in your stomach when Bibi's spell wears off. Caramba! Meanwhile, over at Falkenstein Castle, Chico and Alex played croquet in the dark. Despite having never held a mallet before, Chico was quite an accomplished player, maneuvering his colorful wooden ball through the small metal hoops. Both Bibi and Tina were dismayed when they finally reached the castle and saw the boys. Surely this was no time for games. What are you doing? Bibi asked anxiously. Alex replied calmly, We're enjoying this perfect day. He hadn't played croquet for a long time, but with Chico he felt like he could go on for hours. The two boys were too concentrated on getting the ball through the hoops again to notice how distraught the girls were. But then Tina told them what had happened at Martin's farm. She was not about to sit back and let it all go. We have to do something. Then she placed a hand softly on Alex's shoulder. Alex, please, you always know what to do. But her boyfriend just shrugged hopelessly. Once Mrs. Martin had signed, there was nothing more to be done. Tina erupted all at once. It's because of Roger. I don't know what he's got going on with this Kim Win-Win. But Chico defended Roger. He already does most of the work on the farm. He had experienced this firsthand while living there over the past several days. Roger was tirelessly at his mother's side. taking care of everything. And of course, it was stupid that the paddock no longer belonged to Martin's farm. But it wasn't as dramatic as Bibi looked and Tina spoke. Chico simply didn't understand why the two of them let themselves get so down. Bibi looked despairingly at Chico. It wasn't only the paddock, but Kim's words that were troubling her. Your witchcraft will never last. The dirt had, in fact, long since turned back into precious gravel, but she lacked the will to explain it all to Chico. We've been through so much together this summer. We don't want to ruin it all now, do we? Alex tried to maintain a positive mood. Tina contradicted sadly. Yeah, if it was only that simple. But Chico agreed with Alex. If you think all is lost, just wait. There's more to come. When the others stared at him bewildered, he explained. That's an old proverb. And does that mean things are going to get worse? Bibi asked. Somehow it seemed fitting. Chico threw her a confused look. He hadn't really wanted to express it that way. Alex smiled. It wasn't quite right. They say, when you think everything is lost, a little light always shines from somewhere. Eso, that's what I wanted to say. The two boys hugged each other. All of this excitement had bonded them even tighter. Tina had to smile a little. You're a really great team. Alex felt the same way. Claro, brothers in spirit. So now it's time to pick up our heads. Chico clapped his hands. Caramba! Alex nodded, and all of a sudden he had an idea. We'll start by informing everybody, and I already know how. Alex's plan. Funky Farnsworth eyed Alex disapprovingly, who stood in front of her desk fidgeting with a paperclip. Beside him stood Chico, who had accompanied him on the mission to Radio Flamingo. You know I adore you, Alexander, said Funky. You're sweet, you're creative, but what on earth am I supposed to do with all of this? Weather forecasts, love songs, bees, unexpected announcements in the middle of everything, and not even coming in to inform me first? Then this business at the inn. Nothing. No usable information. And now I have to plan a new program at the last minute. She took a deep breath. Alex used the short silence to get off his chest what he wanted to say. Reschedule. That's a good keyword. Chico nodded. See, this is exactly why we are here. Funky gazed at him, astonished. We? We are holding a live festival at Martin's farm, Alex added excitedly. A super cool location with a huge stage, Chico continued. Everybody will come, including everyone who has played here before, like Chico, for example. Alex pointed to his friend, who nodded in agreement. And the whole thing will be broadcast exclusively by Radio Flamingo. Ad-free, unbiased, and impeccable. Alex took a deep breath. Funky looked from one boy to another, amused, though not thoroughly convinced by their sales pitch. Let's not exaggerate. Huge, super cool, exclusive, and just how do you plan to get it all up so fast? Alex put his arm around Chico's shoulder and smiled. Family, friends, all together. And I won't let you down this time either, I promise. The two looked pleadingly at Funky. After a long pause, she finally agreed, then added, I hope so. Otherwise, your internship will be in the dumpster. This was not enough for Alex, and he asked one more time. Does that mean yes? Funky rolled her eyes. Yes, yes, and now let me be, please. I have to prepare an interview here. Speak of the devil. On a bench outside the pink house where Radio Flamingo was located, Bibi Blocksberg waited sullenly, head in hands. Tina quickly got 2 ice creams and handed her one. Feel-good food, she said. But even a scoop of mango coconut swirl could not cheer Bibi up. Sighing, she looked at Tina. Sorry, I know you have more reason to be in a bad mood than I, but Martin's farm is my home too, and what can I do? My stupid spells don't help at all. Is that what this is all about? Tina asked in surprise. Hey, Bibi, just because it didn't work once. They never really work, Bibi objected. Nor do they even last long enough. And that's what really counts, doesn't it? Kim is right. Tina couldn't believe her ears. Kim is right? Man, Bibi, your magic has helped so many times. Imagine if you hadn't used it when Allegro ran into the street, or when you rescued the wild pigs. Bibi looked at her hesitantly. Really? Heck yes, Tina affirmed. Don't let this Kim woman get into your head. Bibi's eyes widened in astonishment. Speak of the devil, for as soon as Tina had finished her sentence, she watched as Kim Win-Win ran straight towards the entrance of Radio Flamingo. When she saw Bibi and Tina on the bench, she sneered and winked at them. Then she disappeared without a word into the house. A bigger project than expected. Kim Win-Win was the interview guest who Funky Farnsworth was expecting. The two women sat opposite each other in the studio, both wearing headphones and ready for the interview. Bibi and Tina stood next to Alex and Chico outside the cut-off window to the studio and followed the interview live, on location. Full of vigor, Funky announced into the microphone. The world is our guest here in Redwell. This is Funky Farnsworth, and you're listening to Radio Flamingo, ad-free, unbiased, and impeccable. We are honored to have Mrs. Kim Win-Win join us in the studio today to talk about a sizable investment in the Falkenstein community, one that aims to create many new jobs. The young businesswoman had Funky firmly in her sights, which somehow unsettled her. What did these eyes want to tell her? But then Kim replied in a perfectly dignified and friendly manner. The pleasure is all mine, and I would like to thank all the kind people of Falkenstein, Redwell, and the whole surrounding districts who have given me their land for this great project. What? Bibi asked outside the window. Had she heard correctly? Tina was in disbelief. That means we're not the only ones who are leaving their land. And she's not only digging with us, but also with the neighbors? Then the gravel pit will be much bigger than we thought, Alex concluded. Chico nodded, aghast. Que mierda! The four friends looked at each other in shock. Kim, on the other hand, continued enthusiastically about her project. Gravel is the material from which emerging cities are made, she told radio listeners, and I believe in a glorious future for this region. Again, Kim fixed Funky with her gaze, to the point where the host shifted somewhat uneasily in her chair. But she couldn't faze Bibi, who stood watching on the other side of the soundproof glass. Well, I do too, she declared, but not the way you see it, Miss Kim Win-Win. A glorious future for Bibi was not one characterized solely by riches. When the interview had finished, Kim left the studio with a nimble pace and made her way across the street. She was startled when someone suddenly jumped in front of her, blocking the way. It was Bibi, with a pugnacious glint in her eyes. If you believe in a future here, then you ought to follow a few basic rules, she said. Kim looked disparagingly at the girl. You again? Don't you know it's rude to tell guests how to behave? Bibi replied. Oh, you're a fan of etiquette. Good. Around here, we like to show our personal gratitude. Why don't you come to our festival tonight? Everyone will be there. Kim remained motionless. Then Bibi added, Even Roger. Tina, Alex, and Chico exchanged a surprised look. Kim's face distorted into a wry smile, but then she nodded. Thank you for the invitation, she said, moving briskly around Bibi and leaving the four friends behind. Bibi turned to Tina, Alex, and Chico, who were clearly confused by the whole interaction. But Bibi grinned and shrugged. Embrace your enemy. Tina shook her head in disbelief. I hope you have a plan. Chico grinned broadly. Caramba! That's the Bibi I know. At last, Bibi's fighting spirit had returned. Time will come, plan will come. Preparations for Falkenstein Festival were in full swing. On one side of the courtyard stood a small, wonderfully decorated stage. Across the yard on the other side hung old lampshades, into which Chico screwed multicolored light bulbs. Bibi proudly observed how beautiful everything was, all due to great teamwork. When her eyes met Chico's, they smiled at each other. Bibi stood at the drink stand together with Tina. The friends had built a rustic-looking bar by fastening a wooden plank to a stack of hay bales. They had even organized a mobile sauna, which was parked in front of the big barn. Tina checked a list of the musicians' performance times, reading out what she had written down. Dora and the Mermaids, Freddie. She looked at Bibi. But before that, your precious Chico, Bibi snorted. My precious Chico? Tina smiled. Well, he's not mine. Bibi only rolled her eyes as Tina went back to the planning. The lineup is great. Freddie, Henk, and Klops were just setting up their instruments. Tools from the blacksmith shop, like a hammer and anvil, old barrels, and a washboard were used for the drum kit, and Freddie, of course, had his guitar with him. They were excited and nervous before their first big gig. Being on stage in front of all the guests was something quite different than the small show at the radio station. Alex concentrated like a pro on setting up the microphone and monitors. Microphone check. 1, 2, 3. What's your plan now, when Kim comes? Tina wanted to know. Bibi just shrugged. When the time comes, the plan will come, she said. All I know is, if everybody sees the consequences, then they won't make so many mistakes. Mrs. Martin had found some treats for the guests in the house and called for Elena, who took them out to the courtyard. The two women were about the same size, so Elena could borrow some extra clothes from Suzanne for this special occasion. Newly dressed, Elena came down the stairs and called out enthusiastically, "Susanita! It is no wonder that Chico feels so comfortable here. You are so sweet, and this farm is so beautiful." Mrs. Martin smiled somewhat thoughtfully. "Thank you, but I only hope I have done the right thing. This gravel pit, it will be much bigger than expected." Elena did not understand. Gravel pit? This sounded like an unsolved problem. The two women quickly made their way outside. Whistling and singing happily, Kim Win-Win drove along the access road to Martin's farm on a scooter, past parked cars and a few other guests who she greeted like old friends. This new arrival had made herself known and loved everywhere in a remarkably short time. She was surprised to discover Roger, who was already waiting for her at the entrance, above which a painted banner welcomed visitors to the festival. "I thought it might be better if we went in together," he explained to her. Kim looked at him with a touch of amusement and simply replied, "Good." They walked the path towards the farm, past the riding grounds where 3 little ponies were romping around. Roger felt uneasy. He just didn't know how to approach Kim about his predicament. "You know, my sister doesn't speak well of you at the moment," he began. "Good," Kim replied. "Good?" Roger repeated, baffled by this response, but she quickly changed the subject. "Could you help me?" she asked, pushing her scooter towards him. Roger took it over, polite as he was, but returned to his concerns. "Still, Kim, you could have told me how big your plan was." Kim smiled. "The fact that it is so big doesn't make it bad," she continued in Japanese, completely incomprehensible to Roger, before turning to him and translating. "The whole world should participate in our wealth." "What is that supposed to mean?" Roger pleaded. This woman drove him crazy and confused him. And yet, or perhaps precisely because of that, he liked her so much. "The whole world shall participate in our wealth," said Kim. "Your sister will soon understand that too. The other contracts will be signed soon, and then I'll be on my way to Tokyo, home base." Roger swallowed. "Wait, somehow you're always just going away." Kim looked deep into his eyes. "Maybe you want to come this time?" Then she added lightly, "The mill farmer is coming too." Roger stared at her in disbelief. "What is he going to do in Tokyo?" "We're going on a journey," explained Kim, moving further ahead towards the farm. The first guitar sounds were already ringing out. Bewildered, Roger followed after her. "Wait a minute! Kim!" Full speed ahead. Soundcheck had started on stage. Freddie ripped into the first chords on his guitar while the blacksmiths hammered the rhythm of their song, Animal Conference. Alex stood beside Chico at the mixing desk, trying desperately to adjust the sound of this much power. The song suited Freddie and his friends perfectly. Alex was energized by the message, because the lyrics called on everyone to imagine what would happen if people and animals would change their roles. Freddie raved across the stage while belting out the chorus. For the bridge, the boys had come up with a choreography especially for the show. Hank did a backflip from the stage. Klops hit the old barrel with sweeping movements, and Freddie lifted his guitar to introduce the band. Then he suddenly smashed the entire instrument with all his might onto the stage floor. Wham! The guitar neck broke off while the body dangled and swung around by the strings, clanging and reverberating through the amplifier. Everybody watched him, horrified, as he continued to splinter his guitar on the stage floor, screaming, "We are Freddie and the Blacksmiths!" "What are you doing?" cried Alex, as much in shock as all the other spectators. "You gotta try out new tricks once in a while," joked Freddie. Alex replied, annoyed, "But that was only a rehearsal. Did everything have to go wrong already? Freddie didn't seem to care much about that. With us, it's always full speed ahead. And how are we supposed to perform again now? Hank asked. We'll just get a new one, answered Freddie. On the fly? This was our first gig. Hank and Klops were furious. Chico tried to calm the band down. Listen, it is no problem. I am going to start, and you guys can come on later. The grand finale. That's much better, isn't it? Alex offered in support. The blacksmiths liked it too. Freddie grinned broadly. Finale, boys! Alex gave them a sign. Yes, then pack up here first, please. Bibi and Tina looked on, amused by how this all unfolded. Freddie again. But now the guests had to be greeted first. There were so many. They hadn't expected such a reception. No Falkensteiner wanted to miss the spectacle, no matter how old. At that moment, they discovered Kim Win-Win, who, together with Roger, was heading determinedly for the mill farmer, Mrs. Sauer, and Mr. Quigley, who had also just arrived. The Club of Yellow Scarves, Bibi remarked. Tina nodded in frustration. Of course, they all got that from Kim, and Roger is also playing the part. Ah, the trappings of love, said Bibi, shrugging her shoulders. I'm just saying, keep your eyes open when choosing a partner, Tina added snappily. Bibi nodded in agreement. And I'm going to show Kim the octopus what's what. With that, she made her way to the stage with Tina close behind. Was now the time for Bibi's plan? Kim Win-Win was glowing when she met up with the Yellow Scarves Club. Hello, everybody. My peer group, she said. Count Falco kissed her hand in gentlemanly fashion and greeted her effusively. Mrs. Win-Win, the sun is rising. The comparison was not far off, considering how Kim was wearing her elegant trouser suit, the yellow color of which outshone everything else. It also grabbed the attention of Elena and Mrs. Martin, who had just left the house. Ethelbert pushed himself hastily with his tray between Kim and his boss, as he was deeply suspicious of the former. But Kim was not to be put off. The young businesswoman handed out drinks to her peer group and called, Let's toast our project together. Even Roger joined in the toast, as Tina was stunned to discover. Hey guys, everybody listen up, please. A voice sounded from the stage, interrupting the cheerful tribute. Bibi was standing on stage with the microphone, trying to draw attention to herself. The festival guests stopped talking and turned their attention to the young Miss Bloxburg. Kim Win-Win feared that Bibi was again aiming to disrupt her work. Tina, Alex, and Chico followed Bibi onto the stage and listened intently to what she had planned. As most of you know, I spend my summer here at Martin's farm every year, she continued, because I love it here. Klops, who was also on stage with Freddie and Hank, complained. Boring, Hank shouted. This is a festival and not a chatival. Freddie gave them a sign to be quiet. Or do you want Bibi to cast another spell on you? Hank and Klops shook their heads. No way. Being a mermaid once was really enough for them. Nothing against change, Bibi continued her speech. But one should never lose sight of what change can mean. With this, she handed the microphone over to Freddie and raised her hands. Hank and Klops averted their eyes in fear, but Bibi had her sights on Kim Win-Win and her peer group. Eeny meeny, we all must travel. To the future, Falkenstein gravel. Whiz, whiz. In the pit. Tina, Alex, and Chico stared at their new surroundings, dumbfounded. What once was a stage was now an immense gravel pit. They were joined by Bibi, as well as all the others who had just been on stage or standing together with Kim Win-Win. Roger, Kim Win-Win, Count Falco, Ethelbert, the mill farmer, Mrs. Sauer, and Mr. Quigley formed a small group on one side. Opposite them were Bibi, Tina, Alex, Chico, Mrs. Martin, Elena, and next to them Freddie, Hank, and Klops, who had no idea what had happened owing to the fact that they still had not heard anything at all about Kim Win-Win's business. The heat was unbearable as the sun beat down oppressively from above. It was dead quiet in the huge, bare pit. Except for a light whistling wind, there wasn't a single sound. Everyone looked around uncomfortably. Eerie, Count Falco finally uttered. I'm thirsty somehow, Freddie said. Does anybody hear any birds? Asked Mrs. Martin. Nothing is even growing here anymore. Klops moaned.
Well, I certainly don't want to be here.
Bibi nodded urgently. I can understand that, and I can also bring you back again. But when it really gets to this point, then I can no longer change anything anymore, and then it will look exactly like what you see all around you. Nothing but a pit. Kim shook her head, annoyed. Always this nonsense, Bibi Blocksberg. It's not nonsense, Tina retorted. If anyone here isn't acting responsibly, then it's you. Even Roger had to agree with his sister. He looked at Kim apologetically. Sorry, Kim, but I can't bear this ugly view. I don't want to be a part of your plans anymore. His words stung the young woman. Not even to Tokyo? Kim asked. Mrs. Martin and Tina turned to each other in amazement. Tokyo? Roger shook his head. Kim looked at him without understanding. But, Roger interrupted her. No buts. Everything he needed to say had been said, even if it was difficult. He liked Kim very much, but Roger knew what he had to do. Looking to the other group across the gravel pit, he walked slowly across and stood beside his family. Yes, there is a but, Mrs. Martin murmured with dread. I have already signed the whole contract. Bibi lowered her eyes, concerned. Was there really no turning back? Kim smiled confidently, sensing victory. The wind whistled around their ears. Disillusionment was spreading. The gravel was only ever about business. Nothing else seemed to matter to Kim. Count Falco spoke up. But I haven't signed yet. With a great dramatic gesture, he threw Kim's gifted scarf into the sand and shouted, And I'm not selling. Then he went to Mrs. Martin and announced nobly, As far as food supplies, Suzanne, we can solve that too. There's nothing here to nourish the bees either, Ethelbert concluded before following Count Falco. Kim Win-Win shook her head in disbelief as Mrs. Sauer and Mr. Quigley also turned away from her. Only the mill farmer proposed a compromise. We'll find a way to get the feed, right? I still have something in stock, but we can still do the gravel. I'll make a bathing lake out of it later. Then you can go swimming for free. You'd all like that so much. But when his offer received only scornful looks instead of approval, he fell silent. He didn't want to stand there all alone either. Kim Win-Win stiffened at the realization that she could no longer captain her ship of money-making dreams. She had lost. Bibi quickly raised her hands again and cast a spell. Eeny meeny, future's door. Bring us back to times before. Whiz, whiz. Fiesta Falkenstein. The festival could finally kick off. Funky Farnsworth stood on stage and gave the starting signal. Welcome to the Falkenstein Festival at Martin's Farm. I'm Funky Farnsworth from Radio Flamingo, and I'm glad that you're all here. She lowered the microphone as she looked around, confused. Funky now realized that a few people were missing, including her trainee, who had always announced everything so well. Where is everybody? She said acoustically. At that moment, Bibi, Tina, Alex, and Chico appeared on the stage right next to her, and at the same time an infectious Spanish beat filled the air. Simply too cool. Chico began to sing. He shot a glance at Bibi, who was radiant. Alex grinned knowingly and nudged Tina. Are Bibi and Chico actually together now? Tina shrugged her shoulders. Why do you always have to name everything as you see it? Maybe Bibi and Chico were together. Maybe they were just soulmates. Who knew? But it was quite obvious that the two were very close. Both Bibi and Chico were happy to have found true friendship, in the same way Tina and Alex celebrated theirs. After all, friendship united all four of them. They all danced in celebration. Even Freddie joined in to sing along. Roger walked over to Kim Win-Win, who stood off to the side watching everything from a distance. She had wanted to leave long ago, but something was keeping her there. Smiling through a touch of sadness, she spoke. Somehow, I am a little envious. Your support for one another is really beautiful. Roger pulled her onto the dance floor, insisting she join in with everyone else. After all, nobody was resentful here. Even Count Falco danced, first with Mrs. Martin, then with Elena, and then with both at the same time, soaking himself in perspiration. Commendable, sir, what your son has put together, praised Ethelbert. Thanks to the internship. This time, Count Falco did not contradict his butler. But did this funky Farnsworth woman really have to dance with him now? She called out to him gleefully. "Count Falco! At last! I would so love to interview you." "Perhaps another time," replied the Count. 3 women. That was a little too much for him now. While the party was in full swing, a detective appeared with 2 uniformed police officers. They pushed their way through the crowd and then stopped in front of Alex's father. "Count Falco von Falkenstein?" the detective asked. "Yes, that is I," Count Falco confirmed in surprise. "You're temporarily under arrest," said the official. "Turn around." Count Falco was flummoxed. "Excuse me," but one of the policewomen had already secured his arms and placed the handcuffs on him. Bibi, Tina, Alex, and Chico stopped singing. This could not be true. Only Funky Farnsworth seemed a touch too satisfied. Finally, in the right place at the right time, she pulled out her microphone and held it in front of the detective, who paid her no attention. Horrified, the friends looked up at the officers who were now leading Count Falco von Falkenstein through the crowd. Bibi was the first to free herself from paralysis and uttered combatively, "Eeny, meeny, secrets heard. We're coming back. Spread the word. Whiz, whiz."